believe everybody got the paper in front of them. Everyone, please stand. I'm going to lead us in the invocation. And I'd like to say at this time also, and I'll mention it in my prayer, one of the former police officers, John Vanderbilt, is in the hospital, so we need to keep him in our prayer. Let's pray. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, come to thee, Lord, as humbly as we know how. Thank you, God, for this day. Thank you for the help and strength you bless us with from day to day, each day that we live. Thank you for who you are and what you are to us. We ask that you would go with us now through this meeting. Help us to make wise decisions, and that you lead us and guide us through our meeting. Let us be humble, and let us reach out to one another and do it in a spirit of honor and truth. And Lord, now for those that are in the hospitals and rest homes, Lord, we just lift them up to you and ask that you would just touch them, heal them, and Lord, especially John Van Lord, remember him, whatever his need is, Lord, that you would comfort him. Be with the doctors and nurses as they attend to him, and may he have comfort and bless his family. Now, Lord, we ask that you would bless our country, the leaders, bless the leaders of our state, the county, and us as a whole here, that we might make decisions that will be pleasing to our citizens, and do the things that would be beneficial for our town and our citizens. We ask this all now in Christ Jesus' holy name. Amen. All right. Pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Okay, please be seated. All right, let's get started with this. Okay, are there any additions or deletions we need to address, Wilson?
No, sir, I don't have.
Okay. Okay, there being none, I need a motion to approve the agenda as stated. I need a second.
I second it.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion, any questions? There being none, all those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, none opposed. Thank you very much. Awards and recognition. Have anything on that item, Wilson? I don't know.
Just your proclamation, Mayor.
Okay, I'll move forward with that. Just this next little item on the agenda is the North Wilkesboro Elks Lodge has a group, a youth group, well, youth throughout the country. And I've got a proclamation here that I'm going to read in support of the youth in the country. And it says, statement, whereas the Benevolent Protective Order of Elks has designated May the 1st through the 7th as Youth Week to honor America's junior citizens for their accomplishments and to give fitting recognition to their services to the community, state, and nation. And whereas North Wilkesboro Elks Lodge number 1846 will sponsor an observance during that week in tribute to the junior citizens of this community. And whereas no event could be more deserving of our support and participation than one dedicated to these young people who represent the nation's greatest resource and who in the years ahead will assume the responsibilities for the advancement of our free society. Whereas our youth need the guidance, inspiration, and encouragement which we alone can give in order to help develop those qualities of character essential for future leadership and go forward to serve America. And whereas to achieve this worthy objective, we should demonstrate our partnership with youth, our understanding of their hope and aspirations, and a sincere willingness to help prepare them in every way for the responsibilities and opportunities of citizenship. Now therefore, I, Robert L. Johnson, Mayor of North Wilkesboro, does hereby proclaim first week in May as Youth Week and urge all departments of government, civic, fraternal, and patriotic groups, and our citizens generally, to participate wholeheartedly in its observance. I now therefore declare this day, April 22nd, 2021. Thank you. Okay. Now, next item on the agenda is our action items. Wilson?
I was going to switch with Meredith, but she wants to stay. So the next item on the agenda is our public hearing for the reception hall and events venue text amendment. And at the conclusion of the hearing, if you all want to take action, you may do so.
Okay, I guess I need to declare this into a public hearing.
Yes, sir.
I declare this into a public hearing.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I've also got Valerie on the line here to present this item to you. We heard this at our last, I think it was the last meeting, where essentially what this does is this splits up there's a use in our zoning ordinance that talks about many different events and venues, including assembly halls, coliseums, armories, so very large scale events centers. And what this ordinance text amendment does is it splits it up and it gives us a much smaller option, like we can have in our downtown business district or any other commercial business district, and allows those things to occur without having to have such a large land use, essentially with like something as large as an armory or an assembly hall. So it gives us a little different option for commercial properties. Valerie is looking, or I think she's already rented a property on 10th Street, and she's available to speak with you about her business endeavor with that. And what we have tonight is we would have to change two different areas in our zoning ordinance, including the rules of construction, interpretation definitions, where we're going to split those two up, as you can see in your agenda packet. And then also the zoning districts, where we're splitting these two uses up and creating a new zoning use in our table of uses. A few things to consider with this text amendment is we have to make sure it is consistent with our comprehensive plan. Several of our goals and policies do align with this, including allowing for more mixing of uses, as well as encouraging building reuse and sites within our current town limits. So, do you have any questions for me or for Valerie?
Valerie, would you like to tell us, so we can have it on record, what are the few of the activities that you are planning to do there?
Yes. So the only this is going to be a small event venue, just to rent out for small parties, small gatherings, as is there is not a lot of places here in North Wilkesboro. So I just want to be able to provide that for people. Like I said, this is just a very small venue for private events, private gatherings, that sort of.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Valerie? Hearing none, I'm going to declare us out of public hearing and offer a motion to approve.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that the Town of North Wilkesboro Board of Commissioners deems the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance in regards to the reception hall events venue is consistent with the town's comprehensive plan, any small area plans or elements thereof, and does support the comprehensive plan's goals and policies. Further, the proposed amendments regarding the reception hall events venue is reasonable in the public's interest. The board recommends to approve the amendments to the zoning ordinance.
I'll second the motion, Mayor.
Thank you. Have a motion and a second. Is there any other questions or comments from anyone? There being none, all those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, unopposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, let's move on. Moving on down to our work items. Board operating procedures, this is the first discussion, Wilson.
Yes, sir. So this is an item that came out of the retreat, and we talked about the possibility of changing our procedures to make us more efficient. And this is the first conversation. I imagine there's going to be more than one, just because there's a number of topics to cover, but also because this might be a sensitive matter. But if by chance you're ready to proceed after tonight's discussion, you can go ahead and set the public hearing for June 8th. Now, the reason why a public hearing is required is because the town code prescribes the order of the agenda, and if we change that, we'll legally have to hold a public hearing. Some of the other things we talked about tonight, like public participation and setting the agenda, are just practices, so we can adopt those without a public hearing and follow those on our own. But the format of the meetings is codified in town code, and we will need to hold a public hearing before we change that. So if you haven't had a chance to read what accompanies your agenda, I'll summarize it here. The first thing that I propose we update is the town code to get rid of the distinction between the workshop and the regular meetings. And related to that, modify the order of business to match what we have been doing. So now we'll have 2 meetings, under this proposal, we'll have 2 meetings a month. They'll be identical in format. And we'll have work items and action items at each one, depending on what the circumstances are. Second, I am proposing that we adopt unofficial guidelines regarding public participation in our meetings. There are a couple different areas where you all can make some choices, but I think there's value in adopting some standards so that the public will know what to expect with regard to public participation. Now, outside of public hearings that are required for certain matters, the statutes also require that we have a public input session once a month. It then gives you the authority to set, the rules for that. But it requires that you hold at least one a month. So we'd be doubling the requirement in the statute by having a general public comment period twice a month. And thirdly, I'm proposing that we adopt standards for agenda setting, which codify my role in the process, but also formally adopt the practice of giving the commissioners the opportunity to propose future agenda items in a way that's transparent because it's held in open session. So I'll just speak candidly. One of the things that town managers like me try to avoid is looking like we're favoring one commissioner over another. And so if you get a call from a commissioner who wants to put something on the agenda and you're not sure that there's support for it, you can often get a reputation for supporting one commissioner over the other. And so people in my profession want there to be agreement amongst all the board, or at least a majority of the board, that the item is worth spending time on the agenda. And so that's why I'm proposing that we set those items in open session. I'm hoping that when we start that practice, which we've been doing to a degree so far, that there'll always be remember when the retreat facilitator was here and he said, it might not always be this, but sometimes it's this. Even if someone doesn't necessarily agree with the item that's proposed and doesn't want to pass it, they'll at least give it a like this so that we can talk about it formally. That'll be a signal to staff to gather information on it and lead discussion on the matter. And after that, give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. But if there are a majority of council members or commissioners who just think it's a bad idea and not worth spending any time on, then we'll know that during the meeting. So that's the way I propose that commissioners have a forum to get items on the agenda. And then, of course, the town manager will be responsible for getting the sort of routine business items that you all might not know the details of on the agenda for your consideration. So those are the three areas I'd like to talk about tonight. And as you can see in the agenda items, at future meetings, we'll talk about how council can direct staff, not commissioners can direct staff, what the procedures for asking for help or information from staff are, and transparency, i.e. how we broadcast the meetings, how we record the meetings, so forth, to make them transparent for our residents. But tonight, if I can just hear your thoughts on the meeting format question, the public input proposal, and the agenda setting proposal.
Wilson, from my chair, the order of business for the meeting, it looks, from my chair, I think that's a fine list or way to conduct a meeting, so I don't have any issues with that there.
And I would agree with Commissioner Parsons on the order of business being reasonable and proper way for us to proceed.
The emerging issues is kind of like the mayor commissioner topics.
Yes, sir.
The only other question I have, and it's kind of random, is when I was reading through this, it says that the town manager decides where we meet. Is that how we always do it?
I don't know. I mean, we can change that. I can't remember putting that in there, honestly.
Is it in there?
It's probably
I don't think it's a problem that Wilson chooses where he meets. That's something very specific came up.
Well, I'm hoping before the year's out that we're back at our old meetings, to be honest with you, that's what I'm hoping.
Me too. I would say that any time we hold the meeting at an alternative venue, that I'll run that by you all before we set the schedule. So I might be in doubt with that, but I'll never do that on my own. I'll always consult with you.
Yeah, that was my question is like, even if, it's you or in the future, different board, different town manager, so they go.
So maybe I'll add just the phrase in consultation with the board.
Yeah, that's.
So the town code, as far as the public hearing goes, the meeting format is what has to have a public hearing. The other, like the public participation and the agenda setting and distribution, that's more details that can be, so we could actually go ahead, if we wanted to tonight, and call for public hearing, because that's the only part of this that would be affected by a public hearing, correct?
Yes, sir. I think that's a good point.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to call for a public hearing for setting the order of business at the regular meeting for the Board of Commissioners for the town of North Wilkesboro, as listed in our agenda package.
Mr. Mayor, if I can ask a clarifying question. So, Commissioner, when you talked about the order of business, are you also talking about the meeting format?
Well, you had it listed as 2-11 order of business,
Yes,
so I assume that's the reason I called it that.
I got you.
Would you prefer I call it the?
Well, I'm just curious whether you're including 2.7 and number 1, paragraph number 1 in there as well. So, excuse me, so it changes to 2.7 in the code as well.
All right, I amend my motion to include 2.7 if that's required for a public hearing.
Thank you.
Okay, so read that again, so it's clear to everybody.
All right, so you want me to restate my motion?
If you don't mind.
All right, restate my motion to call for a public hearing for order of business for our meetings and 2.2-7, the meetings, which include changing the name of our regular meetings, changing the names to 2 regular meetings per month instead of the current method, which is 1 meeting, 1 regular meeting, and 1 work session, and including the public comments in both meetings.
Thank you, Michael, I appreciate that. Everybody clear with that? All right, that's a motion, I need a second.
Second?
Any other discussion or comments before I call for a vote? Questions for Wilson? Okay, there being none, all those in favor signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, none opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Now, Wilson, on the public participation part and the agenda setting part, I would, what you've got here to me is still kind of vague. So I think we really need to, try to make it more distinct. And you actually gave some examples here by, how to enforce time limits, numbers of participants, and those types of things. So I think from my fellow commissioners, we should provide as much guidance on that as possible, because I think, I think it is important that people that wish to speak to us have the opportunity to speak to us, but they also, certain issues can be hot button issues. And so, we do need some limitations in that open, because we're not talking about public hearings, I know, but there's still issues where people come and address us in that open meeting part, and, we couldn't have 50 people in the night, so I mean, I would like to see that well defined. And then this thing with the agendas, I still like the idea, because I know you were talking about commissioners, kind of suggesting agenda items that they would like to see. And I understand your situation about not needing to seem like your favoritism. So could we, in that, when we were setting up that policy, could it be just a simple, if we were in our period of the meeting where we were trying to ask for X, Y, Z to be on the agenda, could we just do it as simple as our little, thumb up, thumb down, without having to take a formal vote to add those items to an agenda? Because then that kind of falls into what you were hoping of, letting an item be brought into the public forum without, so that it could be fully discussed, and then we could decide as a group whether it was vote worthy.
I think we can, but I'll double check.
What does everybody think about it? Because like if I was at the meeting and I said, I sure would like to see yada, yada on the meeting, but you other four said, well, that's a waste of time. But if, you know, if the consensus to others besides myself thought that, you know, we got a this or this, then maybe we could, to make it just to streamline the process of setting agenda items. That's just what I was kind of thinking.
I think that's a good idea, Michael, and, if one of us proposed something that the other four did not want to discuss, then, we'd have to do some selling to our fellow commissioners to get that item on the agenda, and, that would be the way that would proceed. I mean, there could be some merit to something that just automatically got, that for whatever reason got turned down by the other four. So, you know, that's always a possibility. I think that seems reasonable.
So we're trying to decide if we need a motion or not. I'm okay either way.
So am I.
Yeah, and just having a motion is that, I'm sorry, that was a little bit off the,
No, I mean, I was just trying to make it so that it wasn't, you know, to set an agenda item. I was trying to make it a little less formal because, you know, because usually if I throw something out on the floor, that's not the place to necessarily vet it, like it would be if it was part of a discussion or procedural point of the agenda. So, you know, that's kind of, I was just trying to make that process of a talking point or a discussion point being a little less formal so that the board could talk about it more in detail at a later time.
But with the thumbs up and the thumbs down, kind of, it might be difficult for people who will always be watching it to be able to understand exactly what happened. That's a pretty small movement for somebody to recognize. Is my thought. Particularly if we're in a big camera setting like we are today.
And that's kind of semantics to me, Angela. I mean, we could do it by a simple yes or no without having to make a, you know, if you said something, I said, yeah, I'm good with it.
Well, the yes and no is verbal and can be heard.
But you know, the thing about this process that it works best when even if a commissioner is opposed to an item, that they at least vote to put it on the agenda and hear it out. So to act in good faith and give their fellow commissioner a chance for their proposal to be heard, rather than just voting it down by virtue of not putting it on the agenda. So I just throw that out there as a suggestion that it works best that even when you're opposed, you give someone a chance to be heard.
And I see that. I think that's how we work as a team here on with this board as well already.
and that helps codify that to some degree. I think that's a fair way to do things.
And thank you, Michael. We include you.
I would just like for whatever we do to, if we do it, that it's like, is this gonna be an official thing that has to be in the code or?
This doesn't have to be in the code, but, you know, we'll establish this as an internal policy that presumably boards after this one will follow as well.
Will it be in writing somewhere?
It will be in writing.
Yeah. As long as it's in writing for future boards, that'd be important to me.
This would be the kind of thing that, you know, as there's turnover on the board, we include in the informational package for, you know, new commissioners. You know, it would probably be alluded to in the town code so that folks who are reading the legalities would see that there's, you know, internal procedures that the board follows. So it would be, I use the word codified, it would be codified for us in terms of our practices, but not all the way up to the level of code.
I think it's important that that we would specify that it's just kind of what you were saying earlier, but you're not voting yes or no on the issue, but you're saying whether or not it's relevant to be discussed as an agenda item. And I think
You just said yes or no, put it on the floor for discussion.
yeah, that's an important distinction because you may disagree with something, but it may be valuable to the community to be on the agenda.
Wilson, I'd like to give my thoughts on number 2, public participation.
Okay.
I like that we would be having 2 formal opportunities for the public to speak each month. Because I think it has been confusing to us and to citizens as to whether they can speak at the work sessions. And if somebody does take the time to come to a meeting, I like to give them the opportunity to speak, and this would do that. And the, moving down, the giving them 5 minutes, I think that's a very generous amount of time. Through the years, we've often given them 3 minutes, and we somehow worked up to 5, and that doesn't sound like a long time sitting here saying that, but when a person has one issue they're passionate about, that can really be plenty of time. And the mayor may or may not choose to give additional time, and that has worked fairly well through the years. And but again, I think if a person knows they have 5 minutes to make their spiel to the board, they can plan that ahead of time and be very effective. One thing I'm thinking that might be appropriate, we need to talk about whether this should be in or not. It was a little, it was discussed at a previous meeting, commissioner input after the public speaks, whether the commissioner should speak after the public gives their thoughts. And I think from the School of Government classes I've taken through the years, that it is my thought, and you probably know this more clearly than I would, but at most communities do not have commissioners or the mayor give input after the public portion of a public speaking portion of a meeting. Number one, because that's something we may not have any idea is going to be presented. We may not have real facts and thoughts collected on that issue, so what we say could be inappropriate. And because people can talk about absolutely anything they want to speak about during these public input opportunities. And another matter is, in my opinion, if there's something that the board would be discussing and it's not a public hearing opportunity that night, it can be very confusing, just very confusing to all of us. What gets said, it can be repetitive. I think that it is best if we begin responding to the public in an open meeting session during the public opportunity to speak, the meeting can just become disorganized, unruly. I've seen it happen in some of ours, even when the mayors were trying to maintain control. It's easier for people to have their say. Then when it's time for us to discuss an item on the agenda, we can have our discussion, a robust discussion, all following Robert's Rules of Order. And if needed, tackling the questions brought up by the public. I just truly believe that it's better for getting the business of the people done if we do not respond during the public input portion of a meeting. That's not a public hearing.
I would not do it.
You would
I would
not
not
respond.
do it. I would not. I would. I would not.
You would not respond. That's been the way we've operated for years.
Somebody said something, you're gonna say it, and they'll say it, we're gonna do it.
Yeah, it's gonna go back and forth.
Well, Debbie, in that vein, I clearly, yeah, I'm with you on that, but what is your thoughts? And I'm just asking, what is your thoughts? Let's say a citizen is making a comment about something. Would it be inappropriate for a commissioner to ask just a question to maybe try to clarify what that respondent is stating, because, so, I mean, do we adopt a completely non-responsive policy, or do we have a little leeway that if we needed a clarification as to what they're talking about, do we have that ability to make that statement?
What you were trying to say.
I'll say, yeah.
Larry. You know, in the way I have perceived our meetings through most of my 16 years is that until maybe the last 2 years, we did not respond in the public comment portion of meetings, no matter how inflammatory something was, because it just rolls on, and other commissioners disagree and agree and want their piece, and all of a sudden you have mayhem. And I think there might be a way to, usually if you feel like something needs to be clarified, somebody else does too.
Yeah, you have to, you can't.
We typically would just thank them for coming, and the manager might say, I think Ed Evans might have been the first one who really did this, and did a great job. We had some people come and complain about the condition of the skateboard park down in Smoot Park. And, I didn't know. I don't know about other commissioners. Most of us didn't go to the skateboard park. But Ed inserted that night, I will investigate this matter. I will get back with the commissioners.
That's good.
And he did, and he took action and had things completed. So I really appreciated that, but I don't think any of us, it's not our job to know the condition of the skateboard park. And somehow we got to use common sense.
We got to do this. We can't just not. What we're going to, if somebody shows me, I get mad, but, we can't just one time. You can't just all, but you can't just do a little bit,
I think what Debbie's saying is wise, but I think it might be better as a recommendation or suggestion. I'm not going to commit to not speaking to somebody because I don't know what they might say to me. And that's just how I feel.
Yeah.
But I think she's right. I'm not disagreeing
You're
with what she's
right,
saying.
you're right.
I don't know what might be said, so
You get there.
I guess
You get to there, but it's not.
Wilson, could you confer with somebody at the School of Government, or you may have this information, find out what most communities do. There's probably a sort of standard operating procedure.
I guess the next question is what happens if somebody does speak? Like if a commissioner or the mayor speaks to them, are they going to get in trouble? I mean, I don't know.
You got to know when it's time.
You got to use some reason. I agree with
agree
that.
with it. I give
What
it.
I feel like I have seen in the last, I don't know, say a couple of years, is enough response that tempers flare. That somebody says something, one commissioner will respond and another wants to respond, and we may disagree with each other. We're not working out policy. We're not making sensible decisions about things. We're just responding sometimes with emotion. And that's what I would like to see us avoid.
So basically, Debbie, to wrap it up, is after a public hearing, we just say, thank you so much for coming.
Well, not a public hearing as much as just a public comment
I meant
section.
public comments, sorry, I wrote down here, I meant public comments. And once
We,
the public comments made, say thank you for coming.
Perhaps the mayor might say, we'll take your comments into consideration. We appreciate your, We need people to know they've been heard, so for the mayor to make a
But
comment.
that's, if I recollect it, and I've been around a while, that's been the normal way that we've handled it. And of course, we've not just reprimanded any commissioner if they want to speak or say anything, but most of the times, when anybody comes with a public comment, they get up there and they present it, and they get through, it is under my authority, if they get what I feel like out of order, then I can just tell them, look, we've heard you, we'll take this under consideration, and appreciate you coming, and we'll look into it and do what we can, and we will report back to you.
I don't think, now, we don't do that. I don't think.
You know, it's a little unfair if one commissioner if the group decides they want to minimize input. And I do think it would be reasonable to get the school government's opinions on this. But I think it's a little unfair if the majority has decided this is how we're going to do it, and another commissioner does it a different way. Because, you know, every one of us deserves the opportunity to make our opinions known if that's how we're gonna do it. Everyone should be speaking, and it can lead to just a very disorganized conversation, in my view.
We have had some
We
recently.
We have.
You know, I think it boils down to is we as commissioners need to listen to what the public is saying to us. And if you're wound up in your own head and thinking about what you need to be commenting about during that public comments time, I think you miss the listening part. Because there's good things, people are saying good things, things that need to be changed, things that are important to us that we might not even know is an issue. And if we are talking around each other and talking with each other or about talking out when we shouldn't be, you definitely absolutely lose the listening ear.
Well, and things get out of order too. Everybody starts.
Everybody is, you know, I think it is, we're not fortunate, you got it.
Bert, how many public comments do you think you've sat through over the years?
A lot.
How many?
I don't know.
I'd say, well, 5. I thought there is no one.
I don't know.
And every one of those is important, and it again goes back to the listening ear.
That's right, yeah.
That's why having 2 a month is better than what we've done historically.
Yeah, but there is a cutoff time, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
As it
Yeah.
should be.
And
We have said this in the
Yeah, we
media
don't
long.
do that, you know, we don't do that.
That is,
Well, so
that's part of my duty, I think.
yes, sir. And so the thing I was going to say is that I think that the board's ability to ask clarifying questions of the speakers is important. And I'll try to include that in these guidelines. But whoever's on the gavel sort of has to be quick on the gavel, because sometimes folks will answer the question and then keep talking about things that weren't asked. And so it'll be up to the chairperson to make sure that they only answer the question. As for the other matter, I'll prepare sort of both options and try to get a little bit more information about what the standard practice is, the pros and cons of each option, and bring those back at our next discussion.
I also think it is important what you've written, that the mayor read a statement outlining the procedures before each public hearing, because we get so used to it that we understand what's happening, but someone who might come once in a lifetime to speak at a public hearing has really maybe no idea how to proceed, and I think reading that information is a big plus.
Now, Debbie, are we talking public hearing speaking or the public comments?
before each public hearing. It's, in number 2, paragraph 2 of B.
Okay, I just was clarifying, if you were talking about the,
I'm sorry, did you say 2 would be?
Well, so it has the mayor reading the statement in both circumstances. The statement might be a little different depending on whether it's a legally required public hearing or not, but, these procedures have been restated in both cases.
I have one other thing I want to throw out, because I know I'm guilty of it when I was not a commissioner. And that is, topics were being discussed by commissioners, and I've opened my big fat mouth from the gallery to make a comment about business that was being conducted. And I don't see anything in any of this that gives us any guidance as to, you know, how we, you know, because like I said, I've sat out there in the gallery and gotten passionate as a citizen and listened to y'all talk, and y'all had something to say, and, you know, we don't really have a set, we don't have a set policy on about that. I mean,
Commissioner, I sort of envisioned that type of thing as being covered by Part 2D, which is on the top of the last page. At his or her discretion, the mayor may permit speakers wishing to speak during the debate of a specific agenda item to do so. These speakers shall also be limited to 5 minutes, as in the general public comment period, unless they are answering a specific question from the board.
So
I think that's
we
good.
make that the mayor's discretion, so the mayor has said, Michael, you need to be quiet right now. He could have done that.
Yeah.
Oh, Robert, you missed your chance.
I just said here a while ago, I've been very lenient as the mayor to let people like you comment in there. But I can or could, grab the gavel and say, you're speaking out of turn, you need to hush.
I think you're being lenient was a good thing. I'd say,
Well, I do too, but some people get, wait, we had it here recently, and they just go on and they get repetitive. As Debbie said, it's just repetitive, and it's my place, I let it happen. But it's my place when that starts, is to say, look, appreciate your being here, thank you for your comments, thank you for what you had to say. But we've heard you, and we'll try to do what we can. But you don't just say, okay, damn it, you're getting repetitive. But you did in a polite, kind way, you just say, look, we hear you, we respect it, and it goes back to what Debbie said, it just drags it on, and anyway, that's enough said. For my part, it's good points that's been made. Debbie, I appreciate it. Michael, appreciate your comments too, and everybody else's.
so you coming back to the public hearing with information from all this?
Yes, sir.
Regarding the procedure on whether we speak or not after the public hearings, you're gonna kind of show 2 different versions of what that looks like.
Yes, sir.
I would be interested to see like what the mechanism is if somebody wants to speak. Like I said, I'm not gonna commit not to speaking because I don't know what somebody might come say, so.
Right.
And I'm not saying after public hearings, because that would be when we would typically.
Yeah. In the public comments.
Right.
Right.
I think what Debbie's saying is wise, don't get me wrong, I agree, you probably shouldn't say anything, but not knowing what somebody might come, I also have a concern that like, people don't come speak often at public comments, and when they do, they're nervous, they feel intimidated, and I'm a little bit concerned that if they get there and they say their piece and everybody just looks at them and the mayor says, we appreciate you coming, we'll get back to you, that they may leave feeling like, well, that wasn't very helpful. And that kind of thing concerns me. Thanks for bringing all this agenda stuff up.
Okay. Anything else on that item? Okay. We'll get for that. All right, next item on the agenda, zoning ordinance and town code update for 160D project, and I hope we get through this tonight. Eric,
Before we dig into these two chapters, I've passed out to everyone an updated schedule. So you can see where we're at. We're moving along nicely, but we have had two hiccups. I need to do some significant changes to chapter 5 in regards to the building code requirements that 160D now enforces. So I pulled that item from our public hearing next month to correct. And then also, upon speaking with the state floodplain office, they have requested our floodplain ordinance to be updated as well. So that is a single article in our zoning ordinance, so we're gonna move forward with the zoning ordinance, and then I'll bring back the floodplain specifically to everyone to consider based on the state's model language. So that does unfortunately push our time frame a lot closer to the July 1st deadline. And wanted to check with you all to see tonight if, you know, at a work session, if you would be comfortable having a public hearing on those two items. Just given the time frame, advertising, planning board review, it is a lot tighter of a time frame. If that's agreeable, we'll keep moving forward, get this correct.
So a thumbs up, not,
If that's okay, I know typically we don't do public hearings a whole lot of work sessions.
okay with me.
Okay.
And Mayor, with these papers, we just got these, so we're gonna get to read over these and talk about it next time.
Yes, so what you have tonight is for discussion. At the next meeting is when we would call for the public hearing, so you'll have almost probably closer to 2 months to look over everything. These two chapters are extremely technical.
These chapters?
Yes, so what you got in your agenda packet was, before the planning board did their review. Planning board did their review last Thursday and Friday. They had some minor comments and changes. And I can go through those with you tonight.
Some of this deals with wireless technology.
Yes.
That interests me because with the 5G and stuff rolling out, you know, they put transmitters near people's houses and stuff, and I'm kind of wondering what that might mean for some people if they are
Yes.
concerned about that.
Let me get this. Okay. That was the planning board. Okay, so I'm gonna go through really briefly some of the big changes, just in general for you guys to see tonight. What you have in front of you that was passed out is the planning board recommendation, since they did just have this public hearing last Friday. We did not have any public comments. And then the first chapter of consideration is chapter 16, which is our subdivision ordinance. I'm just gonna do a quick overview, and then if like anything pops out as I go, just stop me and we can discuss it. The first part is just clean up of the definitions, kind of keeping it consistent with what we did with the zoning ordinance. There was some language about like different titles, like public services director, who is what, so that was cleaned up also throughout this document. The authority for the chapter was updated for the 160D requirements. And then also, just as you know, this chapter is enforced in both our town limits and our ETJ. So if you subdivide a property in our ETJ, it goes through this process. So the first change was under 1610, enforcement, violations, and penalties. I mirrored most of this to our zoning ordinance. I didn't get into a lot of details, but essentially it is a land use ordinance. You can enforce it both criminally and civil. Now, most everything's enforced civil, but the current general statutes still have it as criminal enforcement as well.
So I saw that it goes from a misdemeanor class 3 to a class 1.
Yes, that was the state statute.
Which is worse than the 3 of them?
Might have to ask Daniel on that one.
One,
Oh, 1 is
class
bad.
one, yes.
So it's more strict now.
Yes. So that was what is currently in our general statutes. There's been talk of striking, criminally enforcing, town codes. You've heard stories about people going to jail over cutting the grass or something. So there is discussion of that, but currently on the books right now, it is still criminally enforced. Whether or not we use that tool is up to us, but it is a tool in our tool belt.
Can you give us an example of when that might come into play with this particular
this
chapter?
one?
I'm sorry, but it's still.
Yeah, sure. So most of the times we're going to do civil enforcement first.
What kind of scenario would somebody be getting something enforced on regarding this chapter?
With subdivision, probably if not, hopefully this would happen. A developer comes in and starts building and splitting up land or getting things recorded and not going through the proper chapters and avenues. So you wouldn't see it as much as you would with some of our other town codes, but it is still an enforceable ordinance.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's keep going on to the next page. One of the things I also updated was we have a technical review committee and mirrored that with our zoning ordinance to be the same language. All throughout, we had to change language from, conditional to special. So that was all part of 160D. There wasn't a lot of changes until we got to Article 3, 16-24. This is a surveying language change that was done through the state. Luckily, I have a surveyor on my planning board, Danny Wall, and he helped me craft this language so it would be in conformance with our ordinance, would be in conformance with the state statutes. This was not necessarily a 160D update, but I went through and was trying to reference everything correctly. Another change to pull up, bring to your attention, was all throughout the right of way, it talks about, how we're going to, essentially, how we're building infrastructure to these subdivisions. One of the things I saw was oversized water and sewer mains. I didn't feel this was necessary for the town to take that on. So I struck that, but that's something we could discuss. It seemed like a very large cost burden. Another thing too is the stormwater drainage design system. I've reached out to the state about this and they didn't have a lot of guidance other than just referencing their best practices and their best manuals. So we're going to keep going forward with what we have, just correctly referencing everything.
Why did you strike that one out if it says that the town determines it? Because if the town didn't determine it, then it wouldn't matter.
For which part?
About the water and sewer mains?
Number 3.
Yes.
Yeah, it just seems odd for us to determine that and then have to pay for it. That should be something that is done on the developer because they're the ones putting in so many feet of, road, sewer, water, fire hydrant lines. That's all part of the developer's cost. So.
But wouldn't that be if, correct me if I'm wrong, because I really don't understand a lot of this, but is if the developer was doing what was legally obligated to do, but the town thought they should do more? Or not they should do more, the town thought it would benefit the town if they were larger. Can we still do that?
It's something we'd have to look into. I know there are certain standards for, like with your fire suppression system, it has to be a certain size water line. So that's something we could look into if you want us to investigate that further.
No, I'm just kind of asking so I understand.
Okay.
Because it seems like that if you didn't strike it, you'd still be able to do what you need to do, but never mind. Nobody else is.
It just seems like a tremendous cost burden, in my opinion, for that part. Okay. So, stormwater. Erosion control is regulated by the State Department of Environmental Quality. They have their own regulations, and we referenced them, and they were happy to see that we were referencing them. And we have to be the person that says, hey, by the way, you're disturbing more than an acre, go to the state and get this permit. So that chain of command is listed also within this ordinance. Another big change that the state statute had was guaranteed of improvements. Those are bonds. I know we've talked about this a little bit. 160D is very specific on bonds for subdivisions. So what we have outlined in this chapter is verbatim from the state statute. We cannot hold cash or check anymore. That's a bad practice. So that has been cleared up with this ordinance. And it kind of goes into a little bit more detail about the type of performance bonds. And that is essentially what happens is if you have a developer come in, they start all the work, they start laying all the sewer and the water and the roads, and then they walk away and you're just left with this ghost land. And maybe half the road is done and the neighbors are driving over gravel. So the surety bonds kick in for the town to come in with money and fix those problems. So it's a protection for the town as well. And I'll say I have seen that right before the Great Recession. That happened a lot with municipalities, and that was tremendous burden for them to go in and fix. So that continues on into 16-27. This is where the planning board had some changes on how we would essentially, they wanted clarity on it. So what I also did here is I pulled verbatim from the state statute what needs to happen with these bonds. So the duration of the bonds, and then if they have to get an extension, what would have to happen? Of course, it goes into defaulting on a bond and then the release of the bond, where we accept the work and let them finish the project and don't accept the, like we accept the work and we don't cash out the bond. So that gets very technical. 160D also looked at utilities. They started regulating how you can and cannot regulate power lines with subdivisions. That's in 16-33. Let's see, that's another change here. I'm going to skip down to 16-37 under general requirements. This is something else the planning board and I discussed. This is fees in lieu. This is where we started talking about an appraisal board has to come in and evaluate the property. Now we can do that, but with just basic land, I didn't see an appraisal being as necessary as if you had like structures on the property. So that was something we kind of discussed. You know, if you guys have any comments on that, what you would like to see, that's 3B. It's something to just kind of mull over and think about. And then I pulled a lot of our zoning ordinance references through this so that they all match. And then finally, we've updated everything with the Board of Adjustment. They are the board that will hear any appeals or variances to the subdivision ordinance. And with 160D, they had a lot of changes. So that was all updated throughout here too.
Is all the stuff in the red, the new stuff, is that from the state?
Yes. I think with the exception of the few that I've noted for us to look into more. Yes.
How much does that really change what was going on?
For the board of Adjustment?
Well, just those A through F versus the old A through D. It seems like it actually changes things.
It was very similar, but I believe the state has cleaned up even before 160D, the state cleaned up the Board of Adjustment language. So I believe this is probably two times back. The language, so I've just pulled the current language and instead of trying to rewrite it, I just struck it and put in new language for clarity and simplicity. There's not a whole lot more changes other than just correcting different references. And did anything kind of jump out or anyone questions or want to discuss one of the specific?
This may seem odd, but I read in there somewhere that it was saying that it's somebody with a wireless communication tower was going to be.
Oh, that's the next one. get to that one.
Oh,
Yes, sir. That's the other chapter for tonight. If y'all want, we can move on to that one. Okay.
Mayor, we don't need to call for anything on these particular chapters.
Not tonight, you'll call. This is kind of like the introduction meeting for everyone, just to kind of get a basis on these chapters. And so what we'll do is we'll call for the public hearing at the May 4th, work session, May 4th regular meeting. And then we have to have the 2 weeks of advertising for it. So you've got, I guess a week and some change, 2 weeks to kind of digest all this. And you're not voting at the next meeting, you're just calling for the public hearing. You wouldn't vote for this until either May 27th or June 8th, whichever meeting you would prefer. I'm going to jump into even more technical stuff, which is the wireless communications ordinance. This one is very technical. This was not an easy one for me. This ordinance is a standalone ordinance. This is not part of our town code. This is not part of our zoning ordinance. It just is a standalone ordinance, which is a little unusual based on our structure for everything in town. So the wireless communications ordinance had a lot of changes with how they essentially define things. So what I've done is I've updated all the definitions, and I added in small wireless facilities, because like Andrew mentioned earlier, we're going to see some more technology coming our way, and that's something we're going to have to decide on how and when and where we're going to regulate those things. So with the 5G network coming through, in order for cell phone providers to get adequate strength, they will put these small antenna boxes that look like transformers typically, and they'll just stick them on any pole they can get to get the proper communications. And I can bring you some pictures and examples of that if you're curious. But that's in the future. I don't think we're going to see it tomorrow, but it'll be coming. And the state has got some guidance on how you can regulate those, because they sometimes are a little unsightly, especially in your downtown area or a historic area. So I went ahead and added that, but I didn't put any kind of regulations. I just added the definition. Kind of keep that in everyone's mind. Okay, so.
when will we be talking about that? You said future, like years in the future?
It's really up to you guys if you want to take a proactive approach to it. We could look into it sooner.
Specifically regarding the small transmitter stage with 5G. The rest of the board may not want to talk about this at all, and that's okay, but I'll just voice my thing. This isn't like conspiracy stuff, but say they're putting one on a pole right in front of your house, and you're like, I'm worried about, that exposing my family to wireless radiation. Is that safe? Can that person?
Well, I'll say the FCC doesn't really allow us to regulate that aspect of it.
Okay, well, that's finished.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
we can regulate, if they're, where they can put them, or, maybe they have to camouflage them. So there's some steps and measures we can take, but we can't just flat out say no. So,
Yeah, so when you say you can regulate where they put them,
like certain light poles, like maybe we don't want it like on the corner of Main.
just for
Maybe we-
cosmetic.
Yeah, maybe we try to like get them to move it around somewhere that's a little more inconspicuous or something. So I'd have to look into it more, because essentially we're dealing with federal, state, and private companies. So there's a conglomerate of laws we're gonna have to dig into with that.
Well, you may never hear anything about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it might not come anytime soon, but I wanted to make you aware of it.
If they were gonna put one on a pole near my house, but there aren't poles, I'd be. I'd be like, can you move it around the corner?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, we were seeing them where I worked previously, so they're coming to smaller municipalities. Okay, so one of the things I also cleaned up in this chapter was the way it was outlined with essentially we're regulating this in our ETJ and our town limits. So I tried to kind of clean that up and combine them, because at the end of the day, we're regulating them, it's similar to a zoning ordinance. We're regulating this in both the town limits and in our ETJ. We're going to treat them the same. There may be some different processes with building permits. So at the end of the day, we're treating these as the same regulation. So I did kind of try to clean that up and make it a little bit more clear. Okay, so one of the 160D changes under Article 2, Administration and Enforcement, was the requirements of entering a facility. So I did fix that to make sure you got proper documentation and authority to go into these facilities. As I mentioned, Wilkes County would be our building permit provider if it was constructed in our ETJ. And that's in number 3. Okay, so. Again, clean up the permits, how those get outlined with the county versus the town building code. One of the things also that was part of 160D is vested rights. You start a project, you've got so much time where you were vested, and you can keep going as you were submitted for. One of the things too that was really good is 160D really outlined, if we needed to, we could hire a consultant to come in and assist with reviewing these applications, since they are such a critical thing we need, but at the same time, we want to make sure it's done correctly. And that, we already have that, and it just kind of expanded on it. 160D also has said that you can't file a permit for any kind of routine maintenance or replacement, swap outs. So let me tell you, I've had several of these come through recently where they're swapping out antennas, they become stronger, bigger, and we can't regulate it other than to just notate that this is happening and make sure that they're not changing the structure, essentially. Okay, so violations and penalties. Sorry, going back up, 15 exemptions. If it's on a privately owned stadium or athletic facility, we cannot regulate them. So if we ever had that built, can't regulate it. Going back to 17. Again, mirror this to our zoning ordinance regulations for enforcement. Going back to the criminal versus civil citations and penalties. So try to kind of match those up as closely as possible without having a major copy and paste from all chapters. Appeals go to the Board of Adjustment under 18, and make sure that was in line with the process that needs to go forward with the Board of Adjustment. Okay. One of the things we also have in here is we require, again, certificate of liability insurance, as well as, I believe we also have, this is what I was talking about, where we can hire technical consultations to assist us with this review. And that's in 19. Finally, something that was good to see is any new cell phone tower facilities we have that come in town or in the ETJ have to be a stealth, which means they have to be camouflaged or designed in a way that's a little bit more inconspicuous. So I'm sure you've all seen like the pine tree cell phone towers or the church steeples. So that's what we have written. So I kept it to move forward, so at least we have an aesthetic look versus just a giant pole.
Meredith, are you the person who makes the decision about the aesthetics of these?
So the Board of Adjustment is actually tasked with reviewing all new cell phone or co-location wireless. So I vet the permit and make sure it meets the standards, and then the Board of Adjustment will look at that. It's a special use permit. So yes, so I think that's the next few sections it talks about. The next one is I struck out annual review. We don't have a lot of cell phone towers. I don't know exactly how we would do an annual review with them other than contacting them individually. So I struck that. Essentially, we can probably tell what's in use and what's not in use based on the equipment, some other factors. So that's under Article 4. And then, yes, so getting to the application and approval, which is Article 5, that talks about the special use permit process. Clean that up a little bit, not a whole lot, and added some legal language to cover everything. But yes, that would be, they have to meet all of these requirements before they can even go before the Board of Adjustment for consideration. And then we would issue the zoning permit or correct building permits. And finally, updated the special use permit for 160 for the Board of Adjustment. since that all changed again. So lots of edits here, not anything too
So it says if
groundbreaking.
they were gonna construct a new cell phone tower, the property owners within 300 feet have to be notified.
Yes.
What makes you choose 300? Is that the state's guidelines?
That may have been ours.
That seems not enough. I mean,
Okay.
you put a cell phone tower near somebody's house, I mean, that could really affect property value and all kinds of things, like much further than 300 feet out.
We could increase that number if you'd like
Well,
500.
The others may not care. If it were me, I'd probably make it 3,000 feet.
Well, I was gonna say, there's some like,
There's only so many places.
yeah, because there's some best practices for how many feet or adjoining or adjacent property. We just have to, make sure it's reasonable.
We would have to approve that, wouldn't we, for that?
For a cell phone tower,
Yeah,
the Board of Adjustment would.
well, yeah, that's what I'm saying, the town, yeah.
Yes,
They
yes.
said,
And it was a Board of Adjustment hearing, it is a public hearing, so everyone that is within like either the 300 feet that are notified or adjacent property owners are sent letters and notified to come to the meeting and have what's called standing comment and discuss this
if
item.
they don't approve it, then
It goes to Superior Court, they can appeal. Yes, sir. There's a,
they can take it to Superior Court.
yes, sir. If the applicant is denied, that's their next route of action.
We never want them there.
So that 300 feet would just be, who gets a letter in the mail and say, hey, there's any discussion on this?
Correct. So we can change that number.
Is anybody interested in? That sounds
So it's something to think about, and we can discuss it at the next meeting. If you'd like.
Well, if you hear from anybody and they want to make a bigger, I would be willing to. Just because that's a pretty big deal. Cell phone near where somebody lives.
Yeah, I want to say the largest I've seen is 500 feet.
That's not much better. How would that make that much of a difference? Thanks for giving all that stuff.
Yeah,
Answer my question.
sure, of course. If there's anyone else have anything that kind of jumped out at them right now. Okay. Well, you'll see this again. So we'll keep chugging along with all these edits and they're technical, a little dry, but thank you. That's all I have on this item.
So we'll read these for the next meeting. These handouts, Mary.
Yes, and what you'll do at the next meeting, you'll call for the public hearing to either be in May or June. So we can look at how heavy the agendas are. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, item number E, I'm having evaluation process. Oh, that's right, I'm sorry, thank you. I don't know why, take that check that I did. Okay, let's take care of item D first.
So we've got Leanne on the line, Meredith, hello Leanne, so that she can participate. We've talked about this matter before, but I just wanted to bring this back for discussion one more time to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with this proposal. Leanne, as I said, is on the line to answer any questions. But before the discussion, I do have a few updates to share. The first is, we're the first to act. Wilkesboro has talked about this at their own work session, but they don't have this scheduled for a vote, as far as I know. And Wilkes County, I think, has only talked about it in private, so they haven't publicly discussed it yet. So once they talk about it in earnest, they might tweak some of the guidelines a little bit, in which case we'd have to come back and revise ours. But I think that it's worth going forward because our action might motivate them to expedite their own consideration of these guidelines. The second comment is there's no public hearing required to adopt the guidelines, but there will be a public hearing required before every award. So that's just a distinction I want to make. The big industrial grants will also require a significant legal agreement. The the guidelines that we're gonna approve here soon, I hope, there's a whole lot more detail that goes into each one of these agreements that we would discuss on a case-by-case basis. But here, we're just, approving the guidelines. And then finally, there's an outstanding question, about whether on the small business grant, an eligible business in one of the towns would get half their award from the town and half from the county, since they're residents of both. Or if the county only wants to fund folks in the unincorporated areas, and we fully fund all the awards that are given to folks in the town. I don't think we'll know what the county's preference is until they discuss this publicly. But I just wanted to bring that up. I still think we should move forward, and adopt, if you're amenable, the guidelines that Leanne and I brought to you. And then if they decide to do it differently, we revisit it at that time. So we're here to answer any questions. I hope this is just a brief conversation to make sure you all are comfortable with this. And if you are, we'll put this on the next agenda for approval.
Well, I hope the county would consider doing the thing with the towns, because the towns are in the county and need the taxes. The county guys are listening.
Anybody else?
I do think this is a move forward for us to have a organized method of providing incentives. Two towns to be on the same page in the county. And so you're saying we don't need to adopt this incentive policy, or I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, we need to adopt it as policy, so that me and Leanne and everyone who helps bring these incentives in knows what our eligibility criteria are. But if we use these to hook the fish and reel the fish in, before we eat it, we're gonna come together around this table and decide whether we eat it or not.
Well, I would be in favor of adopting the incentive policy as presented.
Make a motion. Is that a motion?
If you make a motion now, if you like.
We can do
Yes, ma'am.
it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Mayor, I make a motion that we adopt the incentive policy as presented.
Okay, thank you, Debbie, have a motion. All right, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, none opposed. Motion carries, thank you very much. Well, now, item E, town manager's evaluation process.
So the Mayor Trish is going to be the staff person for this. I'll step out and ask her to come sit up here and receive your questions and comments. And at a later time, we'll have a conversation that involves me. For the moment, Trish is going to lead us on this.
So we'll make the decision tonight.
That's your prerogative.
I would like more time.
Say again.
I would like more time after Trish discusses this.
Well, I mean, yeah,
Consider it. I don't want to move forward with my thoughts tonight.
no, I want you to hear what Tricia got to say about it. Are you saying you don't want, after that, you don't want to make a decision?
No, I'm good.
Oh,
Trish explained it. I just don't want to make the decision tonight,
tonight, period.
because I want to think about my question.
Well, that's fine, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Once we hear
I'm
what
going to give
she,
it some thought after.
once we hear what Trish says, then we're not going to take any action until later.
Right.
Not tonight at all.
As far as I can.
I'm on the page with you now. I thought it was on the same page.
I think you were, actually.
Okay, Trish.
So actually, I'm going to ask Andrew, I'm just going to pass it to him because he needs to, I guess, discuss the evaluation that he's kind of prepared. He's going to bring.
So, this is not, I'm not saying you do it this way, this is just a way we could do it, that I wanted to be like a beginning talking point, just to organize the way it's done. So there's essentially 3 documents that I've kind of drafted up. And the first document is called the Town Manager Performance Evaluation Process Recommendations. And it's basically 10 steps that I kind of came up with. And I think that would be something that everybody's input would be really good to clarify what we want to do, how we actually do the evaluation. The second document in here is the Town Manager Performance Evaluation Form. And I actually pulled this from the International City County Management Association, which sometimes Wilson refers to. So this document is what I guess they recommend. It was on their website, and I found a lot of towns that were using it when I was looking through for all this stuff. And the last thing is the Town Manager Evaluation Group Discussion. And I will give you the Cliff Notes version of this, and then I will go through the 10 points that you want to. But in a nutshell, the way that it would work is the personnel director would give everybody one of these forms from that Town Manager Association about a month prior to the actual evaluation, so you have time to think about it, do it. And you can fill all that out. And then the day of, at the end, there's a narrative evaluation, which is a short portion. And to facilitate group discussion, I thought that it might be good if everybody was recommended to read their narrative evaluation just for further discussion. Doesn't mean you have to, but it'd be a recommendation. And then from the group discussion, if you could summarize kind of what was said, if there was one member or somebody that was appointed to, maybe the mayor does it, that would be good, is appointed to kind of do a group discussion form, that's on the back. So like the first thing would be like manager strengths, maybe up to 3 items that you mentioned, maybe up to 3 items for areas of improvement, and then, you know, priorities and goals and objectives for the board regarding his performance coming year. And so that way, when he comes in the room, because he would not be in there when you have the discussion, when you bring it back in, it would be somewhat organized on how it's presented to him. And then he would get that, and he would get a chance to respond to it. So that would be how it would happen in a nutshell. And he would also get the other forms individually. But I just feel like something needs to be done to, to organize the process. If you want, I'll read through these 10 and we can discuss that, or we can just discuss however you want to. I just was trying to help. I wasn't trying to say this is the way it needs to be done.
Andrew, discuss with me how you feel this is different from what we were doing.
Well,
Because this is still a numerical, this is still giving a numerical assessment. And that was one of the things that I really disliked about the other one, because I don't know that job performance is necessarily equated to a number.
Yeah.
So, I like where you're going with this, but, kind of help me see how this is different from what we did before.
Okay. So I will, I'll wear 2 hats tonight. One, I will wear to try to tell you this is the way I think that it could go. And then I'll tell you if I'm going to give you my opinion on how I think it should go from my personal standpoint. So how is it different? Well, for one, there is an organized format of steps that we would go through to kind of organize the whole process, which I think would be very different, although somewhat similar to what we did. But there would be an actual process there now. Regarding the document where you rate somebody on a form of numbers, I think that's something that the board would just have to decide, what do we like? I like it because I think when we do these evaluations that we're not just doing it for this year, but you're doing it for coming years, because in the event you ever had someone that they were having some issues, you would want to have it documented so that, years down the road or whatever, you could say, hey, we had this thing and it's a continuing problem. And so I kind of like that, but that's my personal opinion on that. as far as, I'll kind of read these to go over it. So, this says, these guidelines are meant to help encourage an organized and professional evaluation process, but are merely recommendations. The format of the actual evaluation process lies in the sole discretion of the board. And number one is the town manager performance evaluation forms. And if you were to have those, it just says basically that Trish would, or the personnel director would get those to the board of the commissioners, a month prior, and we give them a date when to return. Then point two says the mayor and each commissioner should complete the form and turn it into the personnel director by a specified date. The date is to be decided by the personnel director. So that's what you say. Number three, a closed session meeting should be held for the actual evaluation process. Only the mayor and commissioner should be present for meeting parts 1, 2, and 3. So that's kind of what we did last year when Wilson wasn't in there. Point 4 says the mayor or one commissioner should be appointed and agreed upon by the board to take minutes of the closed session meeting, facilitate and take notes of group discussion, fill out the town manager evaluation group discussion form, and be the quote unquote speaking voice of the board when presenting the form and results to the town manager. Ideally, they should be appointed at least 14 days before the meeting, give them ample time to familiarize themselves. I mean, with that, as far as if you have a closed session, I don't know, it may be asking a lot to have somebody, one of us, take the minutes. Maybe it's okay. Maybe you don't want the same person that's going to be speaking, the one that takes the minutes. That's something that everybody might want to put thought to. I don't know if the clerk stays in and takes the minutes or whatever we might decide. And then bulletin point 5 says meeting part 1, read narrative evaluations. During this time, it is recommended that each board member read the narrative evaluation portion of their completed evaluation form and that minor group discussion take place. And like I said, that was more just so that everybody could kind of get their general thoughts out there. It's not a numbers rating system. Just, if people chose to read that, it would hopefully promote discussion. I don't think that it should be like mandatory. You have to read that or anything. And then bulletin point 6 is meeting part 2, fill out the group discussion form. The appointed members should now fill out the form, which is kind of a summary of everybody's, from their notes, what they thought was a summary of what everybody was saying. And then the next bulletin point 7 is review group discussion. Then that person would come back to the board. So they've made notes that this is what I think everybody's saying, and then they would review, this is what I wrote down to be said, and let people say, no, I don't know about that. And then you can kind of debate on what you want to put the best you could, and that person taking the minutes or the notes can kind of summarize what the board was saying. And then the next point would be you bring the town manager in and you basically read off that page to him and you kind of summarize what the board said. It just makes it happen in an organized way. And then the next part is the town manager should be given an opportunity to voice any concerns with the board or any suggestions how the board can help the town manager do his job better. And then the final results, would be presented to the board or the open session or whatever. I mean, I essentially tried to put some organization to how we do somewhat of what we did last year. But I thought that it was disorganized, and not to put pressure on any one person, but if you did have one person that was going to speak for the board, the mayor might be ideal because he's the one guy, But that's my that's my thoughts on it. If y'all want to do nothing, that's okay with me. Let me be careful what I say. I feel like it could be a lot more organized than it was. I feel like that what happened last year, the town manager probably deserved a little bit more organized and professional feedback than what we gave him, and that's just my personal opinion. That's why I'm kind of trying to cook up something, but I'm okay with anything y'all want to do. I'm going to discuss it just as an idea.
Amber, I agree with you as far as your system, because I felt the same way. And I applaud you for your effort and thoroughness and the preparation of these documents. I mean, I've often said, you are the devil with the details. You do a great job. The thing, like Angela said, this is kind of a bit of something to digest before we, when exactly is the town manager's evaluation due?
All of the evaluations are due in July.
All right. So this is something that if we are going to do, we need not to dawdle with it. So I don't actually remember what that previous review form looked like. Trish, is it possible to get you to email me a copy so that I could see? Because I do remember the one thing about that I disliked the most was that numerical rating system. But I need to see if that here and what Andrew's got here as to, does that change my comfort level? So do you mind sending me a copy of that so I can see? And then the other
It
thing
might be a
is,
good idea to send one to all of us, just as a refresher, since we're discussing.
but then our work session is May the 27th. We don't need a public hearing or anything, so I think that to get this, we come back and try to hammer something out on the 27th, and let's get it done, so that we have the time to get the forms to us, so that we can, because your plan is, Andrew, if I heard you right, is to give us a month to
Right.
kind of process this, and
That was what I put down, but I mean, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks is enough. You needed the document at least, a week before, but I figured they might hand you the document with your agenda or with the previous meeting or something.
But what I would like to see, me personally, is let me take that, look at what you've got here. And then come back as a group on the 27th, let's hammer this out and make a decision.
Michael, I think that sounds like a good idea. What I had in the back of my mind is thinking, how would you prefer to evaluate a manager without using a numeric system?
Well, I kind of like the thing where we had the narrative kind of thing, but I still, maybe before, again, this is like, just jumping into this, before I really comment an opinion on that, let me see what it was about that old one that I really disliked. And to see if the transition to this, because I like the orderliness of Andrew's proposal, so that, it gives us, we're kind of all working on the same page, and we're all kind of got the same process. This, and this, and here it is. So, but I don't remember what that will look like. So I'd like to just see it, so that, but I mean, I will be fully prepared myself on the 22nd of May to let's make a decision so that we can get this done.
And just to be clear, like, I don't hold any pride over like this. If it doesn't work at all, it will not bother me, not even 1/10%. Just to be like, this is weird, or whatever. I just want to try to help the best I can. That's all.
No, I think you're moving us in the correct direction. So I'm very good with it. I just need to collect my thoughts on it, me personally, so we can move forward.
Maybe it needs to be a lot simpler than what I wrote, I tried to write it down kind of detailed so that in the future, there would be an idea. But it could be a lot simpler. It could just be, we'll get the documents and we're going to discuss it. But that's kind of what we did last time.
Trish, is there anybody else within the town who has a group evaluating an individual?
No.
I don't,
You don't like the form we've got now?
No, I'll, none.
Numbers.
I think you're right, you're right.
I'm not sure.
Like no to the numbers. You don't like it?
No,
I
no,
like it, I like it. You can't do it. You don't have to.
I think the hard part about numbers is like,
Oh,
it's like you, it's kind of arbitrary, like, well, what's a 3 or what's 5, you know, and to this person, 3 may mean this, and to that person, that. And also, it kind of feels like you're grading someone.
I
well, partnering the numbers with the notes does give us an additional viewpoint.
But I'm wondering, I'm just throwing this out, and again, it's not speak now until I process it, so, but I'm wondering if the numbers could just be a guideline for us to get into the narrative, as opposed to truly using the numbers as an actual evaluating tool.
Thinking about that makes me think, like, one thing that could be positive about the numbers from the town manager's perspective is if he had forms come back in, and he were to look at them and look at the numbers, he could say, you know, they all kind of rated me low right here. So maybe I need to think about that. There's that side of it too. So there's the two sides of it, like how we evaluate him from our perspective and document that. But also how it helps him do his job better. And that's something we should think about, not just with that, but the whole process. It's like, what can we do to get across to the person?
Trish, things like last year, Wilson created performance-based evaluations for a number of the staff people. Does that ring a bell with you?
Actually, I've not got a chance to really look at that. The one that he preferred very much. But I am familiar with it. I just haven't really got to look at it a little.
He sent us a draft of it. I feel like maybe he sent us a draft further than him, didn't he? Because when I put all this together, I had one of those, that paper he made. And because that was one of the things I was going to try to include. It's been so long, to be completely honest, too, like, with some of this stuff, I'm not as sharp as I was several months ago when I did it, but,
You know, now that I think back too, I believe Wilson did give us something, a template that we might begin with. Debbie, maybe you could go back in the minutes and send that to us with the evaluation we've used so many years. Because if that's his way of thinking with other staff people, that might be helpful to him if we utilize that same methodology.
so this is my opinion, I'm wearing that hat. When I was looking at the document performance, whatever you call it that he made, it's good because it would show specific things that, you know, he was going to try to get done. But I felt like what it didn't do was some other things that, like, this document kind of talks about, you know, with individual characteristics and professionalism and interacting with the community, reporting, citizen relations, and stuff like that, which is also important, but not, did you get this project done? I mean, it may be that you're trying to do some sort of oath.
Those things already do.
Yeah, these things are important, as are the other thing is equally, if not more important. I mean, they're both important.
Once we get a chance to look at those documents, it's easier to decide, I think, that we can all come ready to work.
But like I said, I think y'all are good with it. Let's plan to come back on the 27th and make a decision.
Do you think we ought to try to talk about it in the May meeting? Just kind of like have our own work session in the May meeting?
The only thing that's concerning to me is making that, is what are we weeks away. I mean, we could, got a lot on the plate for that meeting for the year.
Maybe we just come prepared, really make an effort to be prepared for the 27th meeting and get it done that night.
Yeah, I'm open either way, it's just kind of, let's get something in place and that we all agree on, that we can work with. And I think maybe 27th would be the absolute last day in order to do this in a timely manner.
I think whatever we decide on too, we just need to make sure like, okay, this is the thing we're gonna do, let's try to just make sure we like execute it right, you know, like have our ducks in a row so that we don't get there on the day of and we're like, what are we doing?
To me, one of the hardest parts is, it's not so much somehow documenting how each of us feels. We probably already have a sense of those kinds of things, but then how to put that together as a group in a sensible manner, so each commissioner is heard and convey that to the manager in a meaningful manner, and clearly determine whether or not they feel he or she, as manager, gets a salary increase. Those are hard judgment calls to make, no matter how we come up with the rating system.
To be able to quantify what 5 or 6 people think is not easy. Well, Trish, do you have any thoughts or anything to help us? We're glad you're here. Thank you. Guess that's it, right?
Everybody happy?
Yes.
All right, need a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.